They say cheaters always leave clues, receipts, texts, lipstick on a collar. Mine left a diary in my truck's glove box. December, just past 9 at night. I dropped Diane at the church after the Christmas program, told her I'd circle back after checking the cattle. Frost crawled across the windshield while the diesel heater hummed. I opened the glove box, hunting for the tire gauge, found her little black journal wedged behind the registration papers instead. Figured it was grocery lists or design sketches. She kept a dozen of those things lying around. First line, Glenn's hands on my waist during choir rehearsal. I let him. Second line, Wednesday deliveries are our only time alone now. The cold that hit my chest had nothing to do with the weather. I kept reading. That's when I saw Glenn's name in every other line, in a phrase she kept repeating. Our project is almost ready. My wedding ring caught the dome light. 38 years on my hand. Her hymnal sat on the passenger seat where she'd left it. Morning came too early. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read a feed catalog, while Diane hummed at the stove. Bacon grease popped in the pan. Coffee steam rose between us like a wall I couldn't see through anymore. She'd kissed the top of my head on her way to the sink the night before, after I'd come back in from supposedly checking the herd. I hadn't flinched, hadn't said a word, just set her diary back in the truck's glove box exactly where I'd found it. You feeling all right, Walt? She slid scrambled eggs onto my plate. You barely touched your dinner last night. Just tired from the cold. She wore the same pink sweater she'd worn leading the choir at the Christmas program. I'd sat in the back pew watching her direct the hymns, proud of how the congregation looked at her with respect. Now all I could see was Glenn Howell standing in the deacon row, passing the offering plate with hands that had touched my wife. The catalog blurred in front of me. I flipped a page without reading it. Roy called, she said. Wants to know if you're still coming by to help with Mama's tax papers. Yeah, told him I'd be there this afternoon. Diane poured herself more coffee. The smell of it mixed with bacon grease and wood smoke from the stove. Ordinary. 40 years of ordinary mornings just like this one, and I'd never known how easy it was to fake. She hummed another hymn, the same one from last night. Oh, come, all ye faithful. I thought about Wednesday afternoons, feed deliveries, Glenn's truck in our driveway every week like clockwork. I'd never question it. Why would I? Man runs a feed store. He delivers feed. I'm heading into town, I said, pushing back from the table. Don't you want more coffee? Got errands. I grabbed my coat off the hook. My work gloves sat on the bench by the door, leather worn thin at the fingertips from 30 years of mail routes and another decade of ranch work since I'd retired. Solid, real, things I could trust. Diane watched me from the kitchen doorway. Walt? Yeah? I love you. 3 words. She'd said them 10,000 times. I heard them different now. Love you too. I drove to the feed store with the heater blasting and my hands shaking on the wheel. The clerk behind the counter was a kid named Jesse, worked there since high school. I asked him for delivery records going back 6 months. Told him I needed to reconcile our budget before tax season. He didn't question it. Pulled up the logs on the computer and printed them out while I stood there breathing in the smell of grain dust and motor oil. Place smelled the same as it had when my father used to bring me here as a boy. Jesse handed me the papers. Anything else, Mr. Brennan? That'll do it. I sat in the truck in the parking lot and went through the records line by line. Every Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon. Glenn Howell, personal delivery to Brennan Ranch. 43 deliveries since June. 43 Wednesdays. I called Roy from the truck. Yeah? My brother's voice came through rough. He'd been widowed 3 years and still sounded like he was carrying the weight of it. I need you to look at something for me. Church books. Silence on the other end. Then, what am I looking for? Donation records, outreach expenses, anything tied to Glenn Howell. Another pause. Roy had been county clerk for 30 years before he retired. He knew when not to ask questions yet. When? Soon as you can. I'll make some calls. Walt, you all right? No. I'll call you back tonight. I hung up and stared at the feed store through the windshield. Glenn's truck sat out front, that brand new Silverado he'd bought last fall. Funny how a man running a small-town feed operation could afford a $40,000 truck out of nowhere. The printed delivery logs sat on my lap. My hands had stopped shaking. Roy called that night while I was sitting in the barn pretending to sort tools. Said he'd talked to Pastor Jim about the church audit they'd been meaning to do for tax purposes. Said he'd found something in his mama's old files from when she used to help with the books. You ain't gonna like what I found, Walt. We need to talk, not over the phone. Tomorrow? My place. Bring coffee. I looked at the work gloves hanging on a nail by the barn door. My father's cattle brand was stamped on the gatepost outside, a simple B he'd burned into the wood 40 years back when he'd built this place from nothing. Roy's voice came through quiet. Glenn became deacon right when those donation numbers started climbing. Just thought you should know that before tomorrow. Sunday morning, I sat in the back pew like always. The sanctuary smelled of old wood and candle wax. Organ music rolled through the room while people filed in, shaking hands, nodding at neighbors they'd known their whole lives. Diane stood at the front directing the choir. Her hair was pinned up the way she always wore it for service. She laughed at something one of the sopranos said. From where I sat, she looked like every other Sunday for the past 38 years. Glenn Howell sat in the deacon row, 3 pews up on the left. When he passed the offering plate down our aisle, his eyes skipped right over me like I wasn't there. His hands, the same ones the diary talked about, held that brass plate steady as a rock. The hymn started, Amazing Grace. I didn't sing. Evelyn, Diane's sister, sat 2 rows ahead with her quilting circle friends. I caught pieces of their whispered conversation during the scripture reading. Works too much. Always has. Marriage takes 2 to break. Known her since she was 16, she wouldn't. One of them glanced back at me, looked away quick when our eyes met. Pastor Jim preached on forgiveness, talked about bearing one another's burdens, about grace covering a multitude of sins. He was 71 years old and had married Diane and me in this same building. His voice carried weight that came from burying half the town and baptizing the other half. He looked at me once during the sermon, just once, didn't smile. After the service, people moved toward the fellowship hall for coffee. I stood by the coat rack pulling on my jacket when Joanne Mitchell appeared beside me. She was in her 60s, taught Sunday school, baked communion bread every month. Walt. She touched my arm. People are talking. I noticed. You need to handle this quiet. Scandal hurts everyone. Her voice dropped lower. Think of your kids. Think of Diane's reputation. Her reputation. Whatever's happening between you two, it's private. Airing it out won't help nobody. The coffee smell from the fellowship hall mixed with her perfume, something floral and too sweet. My work gloves were in my coat pocket. I wanted to be anywhere but here. Appreciate the concern, Joanne. I mean it, Walt. This church is family. We take care of our own. She walked away before I could answer. Glenn had already left through the side door. Diane stood in a circle of women near the piano, smiling, holding a styrofoam cup. She caught my eye across the room, waved. I left. Roy's basement smelled like concrete and old paper. He'd spread the church ledgers across his workbench under the fluorescent shop light. Bank statements, hotel receipts, donation records going back 18 months. Sit down, he said. I sat. He started with the ledgers, ran his finger down a column of numbers. Outreach budget line. See these entries? Every one of them labeled ministry supplies or retreat expenses. Yeah? They matched dates from hotel receipts I found in the envelope Pastor Jim gave me. He slid 3 receipts across the workbench. 2 hotels. Glenn's cousin owns both of them, one in Marshall, one in Sedalia. The receipts were stamped with check numbers. The dates lined up with entries in Diane's diary. I'd memorized them by now. Roy pulled out another sheet. This here's the check register. Every single one signed by 2 people, like the bylaws require. Glenn Howell and Diane Brennan. My throat went tight. She wasn't just having an affair, Walt. She was signing off on the money to pay for it. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Somewhere upstairs, Roy's old dog scratched at the door. How much? Roy circled a number in red ink. $8,400. That's what I can prove so far. Could be more. I looked at the check register. Diane's signature looped across line after line, the same signature she'd used on our marriage license, on our kids' birth certificates, on the deed to the ranch. This ain't about love anymore, Roy said. This is theft, from the church, from God's house. She signed everyone. Everyone. I sat there staring at her handwriting, thought about Wednesday afternoons, about Glenn's new truck, about the way she'd hummed hymns in our kitchen while lying to my face. Roy's voice came quiet. You can't just divorce her now, Walt. You report this, or you're an accessory. Law sees you knew and didn't tell. That makes you part of it. The basement walls seemed to press in. Upstairs, the dog kept scratching. What do I do? You lawyer up, tomorrow, and you decide if you want the law involved or if you want to settle quiet. I looked at the circled number again, $8,400. Roy slid the manila envelope toward me. I made copies of everything. Jim's got copies too. So does the sheriff, waiting on your word. My hands were steady now, cold, but steady. She did this in God's house, Roy. I know. While standing up there directing hymns. I know, brother. I picked up the envelope. I'll call the lawyer in the morning. Pastor Jim's kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. He'd called that morning, asked if I could stop by after I finished the cattle check. When I arrived, he had 2 mugs waiting on the table and a manila envelope sitting between them. Sit, Walt. I sat. The chair creaked under me, same chairs they'd had since his wife passed. Through the window I could see his backyard, brown grass poking through patches of snow. He poured the coffee without asking if I wanted any. Steam rose between us. I've known something wasn't right since September. He pushed the envelope toward me. Glenn wanted sole authority over church accounts, said it would streamline things, save time during board meetings. I told him no. Bylaws require 2 signatures for a reason. You suspected him? Suspected something. Man doesn't push that hard unless he's got a reason. Jim wrapped his hands around his mug. Started keeping copies. Every check request, every receipt, every expense report. Gave a set to Roy when he mentioned the tax audit. Gave another set to Sheriff Parker last week. The coffee was too hot. I drank it anyway. Why'd you wait? Wasn't sure what I had. And Walt, he looked at me straight on. I hoped I was wrong about all of it. You weren't. No, I wasn't. The cinnamon rolls sat untouched on a plate between us. His wife used to make them every Sunday. He'd kept up the tradition after she died, even though he ate alone now. Betraying you is sin, Jim said. Betraying God's house is abomination. There's a difference. She signed the checks. I know. Every one of them. That's why Sheriff Parker's waiting. Once you give the word, he's got enough for the county prosecutor. Jim slid the envelope closer. These are your copies. Do with them what you need to. I opened it. Bank statements, check images, a spreadsheet Roy must have made tracking every dollar. The documentation was airtight. What about Diane? The question came out rougher than I meant it to. Jim's face went soft in that way pastors get when they're about to say something true. Grace don't mean no consequences, Walt. Never has. Jesus forgave the woman caught in adultery, but he also told her to go and sin no more. There's a price to pay for what she did. To you, to this church, to God. Through the window, a cardinal landed on the bare branch of his oak tree. Red against gray. I want my name back, I said. My reputation. Whatever this costs, I'm not being her backup plan. Then you do what you need to do. I'll testify if it comes to that. So will the board. He stood, walked to the counter, came back with a sheet of paper. Church voted last night. Emergency session. Glenn's been asked to resign. If he doesn't by Sunday, we're removing him. Does Diane know? Not yet. The cardinal flew off. The branch bounced in the cold air. Jim sat back down. You're a good man, Walt. Better than most. What happened here? None of it's on you. I thought about 38 years. About Wednesday afternoons. About her humming hymns while I fixed fence posts and believed in tomorrow. Doesn't feel that way. Rarely does. Maggie's kitchen was smaller than ours. One of those new subdivision houses with carpet instead of hardwood and countertops that weren't meant to last. She poured me iced tea, even though it was January, because that's what she always did. Tell me, she said. So I did. Left out the embezzlement at first, just told her about the affair, about the diary, about Glenn. She cried without making noise, the way nurses learn to do, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stared at the table. How long? Since summer, near as I can tell. And you're sure? I didn't answer that. She knew I wouldn't have come if I wasn't sure. I'm sorry, Dad. Her voice cracked on the word Dad. I'm so sorry. Not your fault. I noticed her acting strange. Thought maybe she was going through something. Change of life or whatever. I should have... Stop. She looked up at me. 34 years old, divorced herself 3 years back, raising 2 kids on a nurse's salary. Strong, as her grandmother had been. Mom asked me to co-sign a loan last month, Maggie said. Wouldn't tell me what for, just said she needed help with some surprise remodel project. I told her no. The pieces clicked together, Diane trying to hide money, getting ready to run. She tried to get me to say you had anger issues. Maggie's jaw set hard. Couple weeks ago. Said if things ever came to court, would I testify that you'd been difficult lately? I asked her what she meant. She backed off quick, said she was just worried about you. What did you tell her? that you'd never raised your voice in your life, that she was talking crazy. Maggie's hands shook on her tea glass. Now I know why she asked. My phone buzzed. Text from Tommy. Heard from Maggie, coming home this weekend. Love you, Dad. Maggie saw me reading it. I called him soon as you texted you were coming over. He's furious. He shouldn't be. Well, he is. We both are. She reached across the table, grabbed my hand. You're not losing us, Dad. I don't care what Mom says or does. You hear me? You're not losing us. The iced tea sweated rings on her table. Somewhere upstairs, one of the kids was playing video games, electronic music bleeding through the ceiling. Your mama's still your mama. And you're still my dad, the one who showed up, every time. Her grip tightened. Whatever happens, we're choosing you. Word spreads fast in a town of 1,400. By Wednesday, Diane had called a prayer circle at Evelyn's house. 6 women showed up, her quilting friends, her Bible study group, the ones who'd known her since high school. I heard about it from Jesse at the feed store. His mama had been there. She's saying you've been controlling, Jesse said, ringing up my salt blocks, that you read her private journal without permission, that she was just processing feelings, not acting on anything. That right? Just telling you what's being said. He bagged the receipt. Mama came home all worked up, said Mrs. Brennan was crying, talking about how marriage counseling might help if you'd just go. I loaded the salt blocks in the truck bed. The January air bit through my coat. Jesse followed me outside. Mr. Brennan, my mama's known you since I was born. She don't believe it, but some of them ladies... He trailed off. Just thought you should know. I drove home past the church. Diane's car sat in the parking lot. Wednesday afternoon, no choir practice scheduled. That night, Evelyn called. You're making her look like a martyr, Walt. Her voice was tight. All this pushing, investigating, talking to lawyers. You're the one looking cruel now. Half the church thinks you're paranoid. Half. Yes, half. The other half don't know what to think. But dragging her through the mud publicly, that's not how we handle things. I stood at my kitchen window watching the barn light swing in the wind. How should I handle it, Evelyn, when my wife's been lying to me since summer? She made a mistake. She's human. But you're acting like some kind of detective instead of her husband. I'm acting like a man who deserves the truth. The truth is, you worked too much. The truth is, she was lonely. The truth is, marriage is hard, and people slip sometimes. The barn light kept swinging, back and forth. She slip into signing church checks to pay for hotel rooms? Silence on the other end. Long enough I thought she'd hung up. What? Ask her about the outreach expenses. Ask her about Glenn's cousin's hotels. Evelyn's breathing changed. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you do. Now. She hung up. Valentine's Day fell on a Tuesday. The church had planned a couple's dinner weeks ago, potluck in the fellowship hall, testimonies from married folks about what made their relationships work. Diane had signed us up back in December. I showed up in my truck at 6 with a folder under my arm. The fellowship hall smelled like casseroles and burnt coffee. Tables pushed together in long rows, red paper hearts taped to the walls, plastic tablecloths from the dollar store. 40 people, maybe. Married couples from the congregation, Pastor Jim at the head table, Glenn and his wife Sharon, 3 tables down. Diane saw me come in. Her face went pale. I'd told her that morning I wasn't coming. Told her I had fence repairs to handle. She'd argued, said people would notice, said it would look bad. I'd shrugged and left. Now I was here. Pastor Jim stood to offer the blessing. Everyone bowed their heads. I kept mine up, watching Diane across the room. Her hands were folded on the table. Her eyes were closed. The blessing ended. Silverware clinked on plates. Conversation started up, the safe kind people make at church dinners. Weather, crops, somebody's grandbaby learning to walk. I waited until dessert. Then I stood up and walked to the microphone at the front of the room, the kind they used for announcements. My boots echoed on the linoleum. The room went quiet. Evening, folks. My voice came out steady through the speakers. I know this is supposed to be about testimonies, about what makes marriage work. Figured I'd share something. Diane's face had gone from pale to gray. She sat frozen, fork halfway to her mouth. I opened the folder, pulled out 3 pages, diary entries I'd copied by hand. My wife keeps a journal, found it a couple months back. She writes about a man named Glenn Howell. about Wednesday afternoons, about how he makes her feel alive in ways I don't. I looked up. That's from December 3rd. You want me to read more? Someone gasped. Glenn's face went red. Sharon, his wife, turned to stare at him. There's entries from September, October, November, all the way through Christmas. Talks about choir rehearsals, about deliveries, about meetings that weren't about church business. Diane stood up. Walt, stop. I'm not finished. I pulled out the bank statements, held them up so the room could see. These are church donation records, outreach expenses, $8,400 spent on hotel rooms over the past year, hotels owned by Glenn's cousin, every check signed by Glenn Howell. I paused. And Diane Brennan. The silence was thick enough to choke on. That's church money, your donations, your tithes, used to fund an affair, paid for with God's money and covered up with lies. Pastor Jim sat completely still at the head table. His face showed nothing. Glenn pushed back from the table, chair scraping loud. This is slander. It's documentation. Sheriff's got copies. So does the church board. So does my lawyer. Sharon stood up slow, looked at me, then at Diane, then at Glenn. Her voice came out quiet. I want copies of everything. Evelyn was on her feet. You're destroying her in front of everyone. What kind of man? The kind who's tired of being lied to. I folded the papers back into the folder. Y'all wanted a testimony about marriage? Here it is. Truth matters. Faithfulness matters. 38 years I gave her. She gave me a diary full of lies and a bank statement full of theft. Diane was crying now, hands over her face. Half the room stared at her. The other half stared at me like I'd just kicked a dog. Joanne Mitchell stood up. This is a house of God, Walt Brennan. You had no right. I had every right. Pastor Jim finally moved. Stood up, walked to the microphone, put his hand on my shoulder, didn't try to take the mic away. I think we're done here, he said to the room. Let's pray. Nobody bowed their heads. Everyone just sat there, frozen. I walked out through the side door. Cold air hit my face like a slap. My hands were shaking now, had been steady inside, but out here, they shook bad enough I had to lean against the truck. 5 minutes later, Sharon came out, Glenn's wife. She walked straight to me, boots crunching on the gravel. I want copies of everything, she said again. I nodded. How long have you known? Since December. She looked back at the fellowship hall. Light spilled out the windows, shadows of people moving inside. I've known since October, been documenting everything, waiting until I had enough to take him to the cleaners. You knew? I'm not blind, or stupid. She pulled her coat tighter. Difference is, I was smart about it. You just blew up your life in front of 40 witnesses. Maybe. Definitely. But her voice wasn't unkind. Half those people think you're a monster now. Other half think she is. Either way, you're both done in this town. Inside, people were filing out. Diane came through the door with Evelyn holding her up. They didn't look my way. Glenn came out last, got in his truck, and drove off without looking at anyone. Sharon watched him go. My lawyer's gonna love this. You just gave me everything I need. She walked to her car, left me standing there in the cold with my hands still shaking and the taste of burnt coffee in my mouth. The fellowship hall lights went out one by one. February came in cold. I'd moved my things to a rental apartment across town, one bedroom above the hardware store, the kind of place that smelled like paint thinner and had windows that rattled when the wind picked up. But mornings, I still drove out to the ranch. The cattle didn't care about divorce papers or church scandals. They needed feeding same as always. 5:30, dawn just breaking gray over the fields. I pulled on my father's old work gloves, leather worn soft at the seams, holes starting in the thumbs. My hands fit the same places his had worn through. The gate latch was ice cold even through the gloves. Metal bit into my palm when I lifted it. Cattle breath fogged in the air, warm bodies pressing toward the feed trough. The smell of hay and manure and cold earth, same as it had been for 40 years. I scattered feed and checked the water troughs. Ice had to be broken with a hammer. The sound echoed across the empty pasture. Crack, crack, crack. In the north pasture, I found a newborn calf lying in the straw of the windbreak shelter, still wet. Its mama stood guard over it, watching me with dark eyes that didn't blink. Something about that steadied me. New life in the middle of February, in the middle of everything breaking. I walked to the barn after. The spring wheat seed still sat where I'd left it in November. 50-pound bags stacked against the wall, waiting for April, for planting season. Diane wanted half the ranch in the divorce. Her lawyer had filed papers claiming economic hardship, claiming she'd sacrificed her career to support mine, claiming she deserved compensation for 38 years of partnership. Partnership, that's what her lawyer called it. I touched the cattle brand burned into the gatepost by the barn door. Simple B my father had made when he'd cleared this land with his own hands, 43 years ago, before I was married, before Diane ever set foot here. The land didn't care about divorce, still needed tending, still needed planting come spring. I heard gravel crunching in the drive. Roy's truck appeared around the bend, moving slow. He parked and got out with 2 thermoses and a paper bag. "Brought coffee," he called, "and Margaret's biscuits." We sat on the tailgate of his truck, not talking, just drinking coffee that was too hot and eating biscuits that were still warm. The sun came up proper, pale gold light that didn't have any heat to it yet. "You look like hell," Roy finally said. "Feel worse. Evelyn's telling everyone you ambushed Diane, that you humiliated her on purpose." "I know." Joanne Mitchell started a prayer chain for Diane. I bit into another biscuit. Couldn't taste it. Roy watched the cattle for a while. "Pastor Jim told me Glenn resigned yesterday, left town, moved in with that cousin of his down in Branson. Sharon? Filing for divorce using your documentation. She's going after him for everything." He poured more coffee into my cup. "She wants to thank you, by the way. Said you gave her the ammunition she needed. One of us should get something good out of this. You're getting your name back. That's worth more than money." The newborn calf was on its feet now, nursing. Its mama had relaxed, no longer watching me like a threat. "Diane's lawyer sent papers," I said. "Wants the ranch appraised, wants me to buy her out or sell it and split the proceeds." Roy went still. "This land's been in your family since—" "I know. Your daddy." "I know, Roy." We sat there while the coffee went lukewarm. Finally, Roy spoke. "We fight it. This is inheritance. She never owned it. It was yours before the marriage. Lawyer says it's complicated. Then we get a better lawyer." Roy stood up, grabbed the empty thermoses. "I'm going to make some calls. There's a family law attorney in Springfield. Handled my buddy's farm divorce. Woman's a pit bull." "Roy, don't argue with me. This is your daddy's land. Your legacy. I'll be damned if I watch her take it." He got in his truck, paused before starting it. "Oh, and Glenn's wife said she's got evidence you might want. Financial records. Call her." The truck rumbled to life. Roy drove off, leaving tire tracks in the frost. I looked at the spring wheat bags through the barn door. April was 8 weeks away. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old coffee. March had come in wet, mud season, the worst time of year, everything half frozen, half thawed, nothing solid under your feet. I sat in the mediation room, across from Diane's lawyer. Diane herself sat at the end of the table, wouldn't look at me. Her hair was pulled back tight. She'd lost weight, dark circles under her eyes. The mediator was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. She spoke in that careful, neutral tone they teach in law school. "Mrs. Brennan, you've requested a restraining order to keep Mr. Brennan away from the marital home. Can you explain the basis for that request?" Diane's lawyer leaned forward. "My client has concerns about Mr. Brennan's recent behavior, the public confrontation at the church dinner, the invasion of her privacy. She fears for her safety." Her safety. I kept my voice level. "Mr. Brennan has displayed controlling tendencies, monitoring her movements, accessing her private writings, making threats. I never threatened her." Diane's lawyer slid a piece of paper across the table. "You told her, and I quote, 'I'll make sure everyone knows what you did.' That's a threat, Mr. Brennan. That's a fact. You publicly humiliated her, exposed private marital issues in front of her church community. That's emotional abuse." The mediator made notes. "Mrs. Brennan, has your husband ever physically harmed you?" Diane finally spoke. Her voice came out small. "Not physically, but he's been cold, distant, since Christmas. The way he looks at me," she trailed off. "The way I look at you. Like I'm nothing, like I don't exist." She twisted her hands together. "He won't speak to me unless it's about lawyers or money. He's turned my own children against me. My daughter won't return my calls. My son—" Her voice cracked. "They think I'm a monster." "You signed checks to pay for your affair with church donation money." Her lawyer cut in. "That's not established fact, Mr. Brennan. Those are allegations. With documentation, bank records, check images, sheriff's copies." The mediator held up her hand. "Let's focus on the immediate safety concerns. Mr. Brennan, have you made any threats toward your wife? No. Have you attempted to contact her against her wishes? I've done exactly what my lawyer told me to do. Stayed in the apartment, handled ranch business during the day when she's not there. Haven't spoken to her except through lawyers. But you did confront her publicly. I presented facts in a public place with witnesses. If that's a threat, then the truth's dangerous. Diane was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. I made mistakes. I know that, but I never stopped loving him. I got confused. I felt invisible. Glenn paid attention to me when Walt didn't. She looked at me finally. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But this, divorce, lawyers, taking everything apart, can't we just go to counseling? Can't we try? The mediator's pen scratched across her notepad. Your client wants counseling now, my lawyer said. After embezzling from her church, after a 6-month affair, after trying to hide assets by asking her daughter to co-sign loans. He opened his folder. We have evidence Mrs. Brennan was planning to leave Mr. Brennan once spring planning secured the property value. She was using him. That's not true. It's in your diary. Glenn showed his wife the text. You told him, after April, when the land's worth more, I'll be free. Diane's face went white. The mediator looked up. Is that accurate, Mrs. Brennan? I was upset. I was venting. I didn't mean... You meant it. I said it quiet. You just didn't think I'd find out. The room went silent except for the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The mediator set down her pen. I'm not granting the restraining order. There's no evidence of threat or harm. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for property discussion. She stood. I suggest you both use that time to decide if you want this to get uglier than it already is. My lawyer and I were walking to the parking lot when Maggie called. Dad, you still at the courthouse? Just leaving. Why? Stay there. I'm 10 minutes out. I'm testifying. Maggie, you don't have to... Yes, I do. She's telling people you were abusive, that you controlled her money, isolated her from friends, made her afraid. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store asked me yesterday if you'd ever hit Mom. I'm done staying quiet. Baby girl, I'm 34, Dad. Not a baby, and I'm a nurse. I know what abuse looks like. This ain't it. She hung up. My lawyer checked his watch. The mediator's still in the building. If your daughter wants to give a statement, now's the time. 10 minutes later, Maggie walked through the courthouse doors in her scrubs, still wearing her hospital badge. She'd come straight from her shift. The mediator agreed to hear her. We went back to the same room. Diane was still there with her lawyer, looking confused. Maggie didn't sit down. It stood at the end of the table, with her arms crossed. I'm here to set something straight. My father has never been abusive, never raised his voice, never controlled anyone. I've lived my whole life watching him be patient and kind and steady. She looked at Diane. You asked me 6 weeks ago to testify that he had anger issues, that he'd been volatile. You wanted me to lie. Maggie, I'm not finished. Her voice was steel. You tried to recruit me to help you steal from him, co-sign loans you were hiding. When I said no, you told me I didn't understand marriage, that I was too young to get it. The mediator was writing again. I'm a nurse. I've seen abuse. I've held women in the ER while we photographed their injuries. I've called police on husbands who belong in cages. Maggie's voice shook but didn't break. My father isn't that man. He's the opposite. And you trying to paint him that way, to save yourself, that's the cruelest thing I've ever seen. She turned to leave. Turned. Stopped at the door. One more thing. My kids, your grandkids, they're not visiting until you tell the truth. Not my rules. Theirs. They heard you on the phone last week telling Aunt Evelyn that Grandpa was dangerous. They don't believe you, and they don't want to see you until you stop lying. The door closed behind her. Diane stared at the table. Her lawyer shuffled papers, not looking up. The mediator cleared her throat. Mrs. Brennan, I'm going to strongly suggest you reconsider your narrative. False allegations of abuse are taken very seriously by this court. Then she looked at me. Mr. Brennan, there's someone else here who wants to speak with you. Sharon Howell, she's waiting in the hallway. Sharon sat on the bench by the water fountain. When she saw me, she stood and handed me a folder. Glenn signed a confession, she said. For my divorce, names Diane as a willing participant, details the embezzlement scheme, the hotel arrangements, everything. I opened the folder. 3 pages, notarized, Glenn's signature at the bottom of each. Why are you giving me this? Because you helped me, and because she's trying to destroy you the same way she helped destroy my marriage. Sharon's jaw was set. I kept the original. That's your copy. Use it however you need to. I read the first paragraph. Diane Brennan and I began an inappropriate relationship in June. We used church donation funds to pay for hotel rooms. The scheme was her idea. She had access to the checking account and knew how to make the charges look legitimate. He's lying about whose idea it was, Sharon said. But the rest is solid. Dates, amounts, locations. My lawyer says it's enough to bury them both. Where is he now? Branson, working for his cousin, won't come back to town. She picked up her purse. My lawyer said, with this confession, your wife loses any claim to marital property obtained through fraud. That includes the ranch. The ranch was mine before we married. Even better, she's got nothing. Sharon headed for the door, paused. I know what people are saying about you, that you're cruel, that you should have handled it quiet. Screw 'em, you did what you had to do, so did I. She left. I stood in the courthouse hallway holding Glenn's confession, and for the first time in 3 months, I felt like I could breathe. My lawyer came out of the mediation room. Her attorney wants to settle, today. They're offering to drop the restraining order request and accept a minimal settlement if you agree to sealed records. No. Walt, I said no. Truth, don't hide. The knock came at 7 in the evening. I was in the apartment heating up a can of soup, the kind that tastes like salt and regret, when I heard it. 3 soft raps. Evelyn stood in the hallway, Diane's sister, the one who'd called me cruel, the one who'd organized prayer circles for Diane and told half the town I was making a martyr out of her. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She looked around the apartment. One room with a hot plate, a card table, a mattress on the floor, the kind of place a man ends up when his life falls apart. Smelled like old carpet and the Chinese takeout I'd had 2 nights ago. I won't stay long. She sat at the card table without being asked. Her coat was still buttoned up. I came to apologize. I turned off the hot plate, waited. Diane called me yesterday, asked me to testify at the next hearing. Evelyn's hands were folded on the table. Wanted me to say you hit me once, 5 years ago at Thanksgiving. Said you were drunk and pushed me when I tried to break up a fight between you and her. The soup pot ticked as it cooled. Nothing like that ever happened, I said. I know, that's why I'm here. She looked up at me, red eyes. She'd been crying. I told her I couldn't do it. Couldn't lie for her, not even to a lawyer. She said I was choosing you over my own blood, that I was betraying her when she needed me most. What did you say? I said, I'm choosing the truth. There's a difference. Outside, a truck rumbled past on Main Street. The window rattled in its frame. She's been calling people, Evelyn continued. Everyone we know, asking them to say things that aren't true, that you were controlling, that you monitored her phone, that you threatened her. Her voice dropped. Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store, Linda from Bible study, even tried to get Pastor Jim to say you'd been aggressive during counseling sessions that never happened. Jesus. She's desperate, Walt. I get that, but she's asking people to commit perjury, to ruin you to save herself. Evelyn pulled a tissue from her purse, didn't use it, just twisted it in her hands. I wanted to believe her version, that you'd driven her to it somehow, that you'd been cold or distant or whatever excuse made sense, because believing that was easier than believing my sister could do what she did. The fluorescent light over the sink buzzed. One of the tubes was dying. I saw the bank statements, she said. Diane left them at my house last week, tried to hide them under the couch cushions when the lawyer called. I found them after she left. Evelyn looked at me. She opened 3 credit cards in her name, maxed them out, was planning to file bankruptcy after the divorce to wipe them clean. The statements were all for things Glenn wanted. Tools, hunting equipment, that truck. She was buying him presents with borrowed money. Borrowed money she was going to make disappear in bankruptcy court. And Walt, Evelyn's voice cracked. There's a loan application for $40,000. She forged your signature. My chest went tight. When? January. Before you served her. She was trying to take a loan against the ranch without you knowing. Bank caught it because they called to verify. You didn't know? First I'm hearing of it. That's fraud, real fraud, not just... She stopped herself. Not just adultery. I was going to say not just betrayal, but yeah. She stood up. The tissue was shredded in her hands. I'm testifying for you. If it comes to trial, I'm telling them she asked me to lie. I'm telling them about the credit cards and the forged signature. I'm telling them everything. Evelyn, she's my sister. I love her, but I can't watch her destroy you and pretend it's okay. She headed for the door, stopped with her hand on the knob. You know what the worst part is? I think she actually believes her own lies now. She's told the story so many times that you were awful, that she had no choice. I think she's convinced herself it's true. Maybe it's easier that way. Maybe, but it don't make it right. She opened the door. Cold air rushed in from the stairwell. I'm praying for her, Walt. I am, but I'm praying for you too, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. After she left, I sat at the card table for a long time. The soup had gone cold in the pot. I poured it down the sink without eating. Outside, the streetlight flickered on. March twilight, that gray time when winter's ending but spring hasn't quite arrived. Everything suspended in between. I thought about Diane making phone calls, recruiting people to lie, forging my name on loan papers, using church money to buy presents for a man who'd left town the minute things got hard. 38 years I'd known her, or thought I had. My phone buzzed. Text from Roy. Pastor Jim wants to see you tomorrow. Says it's important. I texted back. What time? 10 a.m. at the church, board meeting. I looked at the half-empty apartment, at the life I was living now. Single room above a hardware store at 62 years old. But my name was still mine. And the truth was still the truth. That had to count for something. Pastor Jim's office smelled like old books and lemon furniture polish. He sat behind his desk with Roy on one side and two other board members on the other, Bill Henderson and Frank Oates, both men I'd known 40 years. Thanks for coming, Walt. Jim gestured to the empty chair. We wanted to talk to you before Sunday. About? The board voted last night. Unanimous. Jim folded his hands on the desk. We're announcing the embezzlement investigation from the pulpit on Easter Sunday, making it public, official. Glenn already resigned. This isn't about Glenn, not anymore. Bill Henderson leaned forward. He was 70, ran the hardware store below my apartment. It's about accountability, about showing the congregation we take this seriously, that we're not sweeping it under the rug. Frank Oates nodded. Donations are down 30% since February. People are asking questions. They got a right to know what happened to their money. And Diane? I asked. Jim's face went grave. She's named in the announcement. As a co-signer on the fraudulent checks, we're not calling her a criminal from the pulpit. That's for the courts to decide. But we're being clear about who had access and who signed off. She's planning to attend Easter service, Roy said. Told Evelyn she's not going to hide, that she's going to face the congregation and ask for forgiveness. Let her, Jim said. That's between her and God. But the congregation deserves to know the truth first. He pulled out a sheet of paper. I'm preaching on false witness, bearing false testimony, the 9th commandment. He slid it across the desk. I wanted you to see it first. Make sure I'm not saying anything that'll hurt your legal case. I read through it. It was careful, scriptural, didn't name names directly but didn't hide facts either. Talked about sin, repentance, restitution, about how the church had failed in oversight, and how they were implementing new financial controls. At the bottom, a note. Sheriff Parker will be in attendance. Not to arrest anyone, but to demonstrate that the law is aware and involved. You're making it official. We have to. Jim took the paper back. The county prosecutor contacted us last week, said if we don't cooperate fully, the whole board could be liable. We're protecting the church, but Walt, he looked at me. We're also protecting you, because what Diane did, she did in God's house, under his name. That makes it our responsibility to call it what it is. Bill spoke up. We know this is hard on you, having it all dragged out public, but staying silent would be worse, would mean we condoned it. I'm not asking you to stay silent. Good, because we're not going to. Jim stood, walked to the window. Outside, the church cemetery spread across the hill, generations of the town buried there. Your daddy's out there, and my wife, and half the people who built this place. They trusted us to keep it honest, to keep it holy. He turned back. Diane's going to be there Sunday. She can come, that's her right, but she's going to hear the truth, and so is everyone else. What happens after? That's up to her, and God, and probably the county prosecutor. Jim came back to the desk. But Walt, I want you there too. I want you sitting in that sanctuary, because you're not the one who should be hiding. Roy cleared his throat. I'll be there. So will Tommy and Maggie. We're sitting with you. Frank nodded. My whole family's sitting with you. Linda's already called half the women's group. You got more support than you think. Other half thinks I'm the devil. Other half don't know what really happened yet, Bill said. They will come Sunday. Jim pulled out another folder. There's something else. Glenn's cousin, the one who owns the hotels, he came forward last week. Gave us copies of all the reservations, names, dates, credit card numbers. Glenn paid cash for most of them, but 3 times Diane used her personal credit card. Left a paper trail. He slid the folder across. Your lawyer should have these. They prove she knew exactly what was happening, that it wasn't just Glenn manipulating her like she's been claiming. I opened the folder. Hotel receipts, Diane's signature on 2 of them, her credit card number. She can't claim ignorance anymore, Roy said quietly. Outside, a car pulled into the church lot, probably someone coming for the food pantry, normal church business continuing while everything else burned. Sunday's Easter, Jim said. Resurrection Sunday, new life. Seems fitting we clear the air then, let truth rise from the tomb of lies. You been working on that line? He smiled. Little bit, but it's true. You can't have resurrection without death first. Something's got to die for something new to grow. I stood up. I'll be there Sunday, front pew or back. Wherever you're comfortable. But Walt... Jim walked me to the door. Hold your head up. You didn't do this. You just refused to pretend it didn't happen. In the parking lot, Roy walked me to my truck. The March wind was warmer now, smelled like rain coming, the kind that washes winter away and leaves mud behind. You ready for this? Roy asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's all any of us can do. He drove off. I sat in my truck for a while, watching the church. White building with a steeple, same as it had looked for 100 years, same as it would look 100 years from now. Sunday was 4 days away. Easter Sunday came in warm. First real day of spring, sun actually had heat to it, mud drying in the church parking lot, robins singing in the oak trees, the kind of morning that feels like a promise. I wore my good boots and the sports coat I hadn't touched since Christmas. Tommy drove up from Springfield with his wife. Maggie met us in the parking lot with her kids. Roy pulled in right behind them. We're sitting together, Maggie said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. We walked in as a unit, 5 adults, 2 kids. The sanctuary was already half full. Heads turned when we entered. Some folks nodded. Others looked away quick. We took the 4th pew on the right. Used to be my parents sat there when I was a boy. Felt right to claim it again. The organ started up. People filed in. I watched the door. 10:30. Service was supposed to start at 10:45, 10:40. Still no Diane. Then she walked in. She wore a blue dress, the one she'd worn to our daughter's wedding 3 years back. Hair done nice. Makeup covering the weight she'd lost and the circles under her eyes. She carried her Bible and her hymnal. Walked right down the center aisle like she'd done 1,000 times before. People watched her. The sanctuary went quiet, except for someone's baby fussing in the back. Diane headed for her usual spot. 3rd row left, where she'd sat for 38 years. Where the choir director always sat. She got to the pew. 3 women were already sitting there. Linda Patterson, Joanne Mitchell, Carol Freeman, the Quilting Circle ladies. Diane smiled at them. Morning. Linda looked at her, looked at Joanne, then stood up, picked up her purse, and moved to a different row. Joanne followed. Carol stayed seated for a moment, then she stood too. Diane's smile faltered. She stood there in the aisle while people watched. Finally, she sat down in the empty pew alone. Evelyn came in last minute, walked past Diane without stopping, sat with us. The organ music swelled. Pastor Jim came out in his Easter vestments, white and gold, the ones they only used for Resurrection Sunday. Sheriff Parker stood at the back in uniform, not threatening, just present. Jim opened with prayer. Everyone bowed their heads except Diane. She sat with her eyes open, staring at the pulpit. The hymn started. Christ the Lord is risen today. Everyone stood. Diane stood too, but she didn't sing, just held her hymnal unopened. Then Jim stepped up to preach. This is a day of resurrection, he started. A day when death loses its power and truth comes into the light. And church, we got some truth that needs saying. He didn't sugarcoat it. Talked about how church leadership had failed in oversight. How trust had been violated. How $8,400 in donation money had been stolen from God's house and used for personal sin. 2 people had access to that money, Jim said. Both signed the checks. Both knew where it was going. Both covered it up with false labels. Ministry supplies, outreach expenses, retreat costs, all lies. Diane's face had gone white. Glenn Howell resigned in February, left town, but resignation don't erase sin, and it don't erase the law. Jim looked out over the congregation. The county prosecutor has the evidence. The sheriff has the evidence. This church is cooperating fully, because what was done here, what was done in God's name, That's not just betrayal, that's blasphemy. Someone in the back said, Amen. Now I know some of y'all been hearing stories that this was all Glenn, that someone else was manipulated or coerced. Jim's voice got firm. Church, I've seen the bank records, I've seen the signatures, I've seen the hotel receipts with both names on them. This wasn't manipulation, this was conspiracy. He paused. Let that sink in. The Bible says in Exodus 20:16, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." That's not just about lying in court. It's about lying to cover sin. It's about rewriting truth to save your own skin. Diane stood up, sudden. Her hymnal clattered to the floor. I came here to ask forgiveness, she said. Her voice shook. I made mistakes. I know that. But this public shaming, this isn't Christian. Jim looked at her. Sit down, Diane. No, you're making me out to be a criminal. You signed checks to steal from the church. That's the legal definition of embezzlement. That's criminal. Glenn said it was for ministry. You knew better. You kept the books. You covered it up. Jim's voice didn't rise. Didn't have to. Now sit down or leave, but I'm finishing the sermon. Diane looked around the sanctuary, waiting for someone to defend her. No one spoke. She grabbed her purse and walked out. The door banged shut behind her. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then Jim continued. Resurrection requires death first. You can't have new life without putting the old in the ground. That's true for all of us. We all got sin. We all need grace, but grace don't mean pretending wrong is right. It means facing it, repenting, making restitution. He looked right at me. Some folks in this room been hurt bad by what happened. Had their trust broken, their marriage destroyed. Their name dragged through mud, and they didn't run, didn't hide. They stood in truth even when it cost them. Maggie reached over and took my hand. So today, we choose truth, we choose accountability, and we choose to be a church that don't protect sin just because it's comfortable. The sermon ended. The final hymn played. People filed out slow, nobody quite sure what to do. I was walking to my truck when Sharon Howell caught up to me in the parking lot. She had a manila envelope in her hands. One more thing, she said. Didn't want to give this to you inside. I opened it. More papers. Bank statements. Email printouts. Glenn kept records, from what Sharon said, of everything. Dates, amounts, text messages between him and Diane, planning which hotels to use, how to label the expenses, who to lie to if questions came up. She pulled out one page. An email from Diane to Glenn, dated January 10th. After April, when the spring planning's done and the land value's up, I can file for divorce and get half. Walt won't see it coming. We can start fresh with real money, not just church donations. I read it twice. She was using you, Sharon said, waiting until your ranch was worth more to file, planning to take you for everything. Why are you giving me this? Because my lawyer said Glenn's confession is enough to fry him in my divorce. But you need this to protect the ranch, to prove she was planning financial fraud from the start. She handed me the whole envelope. That's all of it. Emails, texts Glenn saved, even a voice recording where she talks about timing the divorce around planting season. Jesus. My lawyer called yours this morning, said your wife's attorney wants to settle. Today. They're dropping all property claims. She keeps the house for 3 years, then it sells, and you split that. But the ranch stays yours, full ownership, no split. Why the sudden change? Because we told them we had this evidence, that we were going to submit it to the court, that we could prove premeditated fraud. Sharon looked back at the church. She's done, Walt. Legally, socially, all of it. Take the settlement. End this. My lawyer had been right. Truth was the best weapon. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank yourself for not staying quiet. She walked to her car. Oh, and Walt? That woman in there who stood up for you? Your daughter? She's got more spine than anyone I've ever met. I looked at the envelope in my hands, at the church behind me, at the blue sky that finally felt like spring. Tommy came up beside me. Dad, you okay? Yeah, I am. Good, 'cause we're going to the ranch. Maggie bought seeds. We're planting that spring wheat today. The settlement conference took 20 minutes. Diane didn't show up in person, sent her lawyer with papers already signed. I sat across the table from a man in a suit who wouldn't look me in the eye while he listed the terms. Diane kept the house for 3 years, until the youngest grandkid graduated high school. Then it sold, and we split the proceeds. No alimony, no claim to the ranch or the 80 acres. Shared custody of our relationship with the kids, which meant nothing since they were grown and choosing their own sides. The mediator slid the papers toward me. Mr. Brennan, your wife has also agreed to a deferred prosecution on the embezzlement charges. She'll make full restitution to the church, $8,400, over the next 2 years. If she completes payment and stays out of legal trouble, the charges get dismissed. And if she doesn't pay, then the prosecutor moves forward with criminal charges. My lawyer leaned over. It's a good deal, Walt. Better than dragging this through trial. I looked at the settlement, at Diane's signature already there at the bottom, shaky, not like her usual handwriting. One condition, I said. The mediator looked up. What's that? Records stay unsealed, no confidentiality clause. Anyone asks what happened, I can tell the truth. Diane's lawyer started to object. My lawyer cut him off. His reputation was damaged publicly. He has a right to defend it publicly. The mediator made a note. Agreed. No gag order. I signed the papers. Walked out of the courthouse into April sunshine. The maple trees were budding out. Smell of fresh earth and new grass. Everything coming back to life. Roy was waiting on the steps. Done? Done. How do you feel? Tired, relieved, empty. I looked at the papers in my hand. Feels like I should feel something bigger, but mostly I just feel like I want to go home. Then let's go home. Easter Monday. Dawn breaking gold over the east pasture. I pulled on my new work gloves, bought them at Bill Henderson's hardware store, felt stiff compared to my father's old ones, and walked out to the barn. Tommy's truck was already there. He'd driven up last night, stayed in the spare bedroom that used to be his. Maggie pulled in right behind me with the kids and a trunk full of flower seeds. Ready to plant? Tommy called from the barn door. Ready. We loaded the seed bags onto the flatbed. The spring wheat I'd been saving since November. 50 pounds of promise. The tractor started on the second try, same John Deere my father had bought in 1983. Tommy climbed up, took the wheel. I rode on the fender like I used to do when I was a boy, and he was the one small enough to ride along. We drove out to the south field, the one my father had cleared by hand, the one he'd always planted first come spring. The earth smelled like rain and time, rich and dark, ready. Tommy drove the rows straight as a ruler while I worked the seed drill. Maggie walked behind with the kids, showing them how to check the depth, how to cover the furrows, teaching them the same way I'd taught her 30 years ago. The sun climbed higher, warm on my neck, real warmth, not that thin winter sun, the kind that makes things grow. Roy showed up around 9 with coffee and sandwiches his neighbor had made. We sat on the tailgate eating while the kids ran between the tractor rows, laughing. That sound, children laughing on land that's been in the family for generations, that's what forever sounds like. You think the wheat'll take? Tommy asked. Land don't fail if you treat it right. Maggie was planting flowers by the mailbox post. Perennials. The kind that come back year after year. She'd brought a basketful. Daisies and coneflowers and black-eyed Susans. Mom called me this morning, she said without looking up from the dirt. I didn't say anything. Wanted to know if the kids could come visit her next weekend. I told her maybe. After she makes things right with the church. After she tells them the truth instead of her version of it. That's fair. Is it? She sat back on her heels. I don't know anymore, Dad. I don't know what fair looks like when your mother lies to your face and asks you to lie for her. Fair looks like protecting your kids, like teaching them truth matters. You're doing that. She went back to planting. The kids helped her pat down the soil, gentle, careful, learning how to make things grow. By noon, the wheat was in, 40 acres planted. The field looked raw, just turned earth and scattered seed. But in a few weeks, green shoots would come up. In a few months, golden waves tall enough to hide in. I stood at the fence looking out over it. Tommy came and stood beside me, then Maggie with dirt on her knees, then Roy, then the grandkids squeezed between us. Grandpa, the oldest one said. She was 7. Why did Grandma leave? Nobody spoke for a moment. Sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones who love them, I said. Not because they're bad people, just because they forget what matters. What matters? This. I gestured at the field, at the family standing here, at the land that had held us for 3 generations. This matters. Tommy put his hand on the fence post, the one with the cattle brand, the bee my father burned into the wood before I was born. We're keeping it, he said. The brand, The land, all of it, passing it down. Damn right we are. Maggie smiled. Language, Dad. Your grandmother would have said worse. We stood there until the sun started its downward arc. Until the kids got restless and hungry. Until Roy said he had to get home to feed his dog. But before we left, I did one thing, took my new work gloves off, hung them on the nail by the barn door, right next to where my father's gloves used to hang before they finally fell apart. Leather and work and legacy, all in a row. The wheat would grow, the kids would remember, the land would hold. That was enough. People ask if I forgive her. I tell them forgiveness ain't the same as forgetting. I don't carry hate around, too heavy for a man my age. But I don't pretend 38 years of lies can be prayed away with a few sorries either. Truth is, Diane got what she wanted, in a way. She wanted to feel alive, wanted something different than the life we'd built. She got different, all right. Lives in that house alone, now. Evelyn checks on her sometimes, tells me she's working at the county library. Keeps to herself mostly. Church sees her on Christmas and Easter, if the weather's good. Glenn's gone for good. Heard he's selling farm equipment down in Arkansas. Married a woman half his age last fall. Some men never learn. April came like it always does. Wheat sprouted right on schedule. Green rows running straight across the south field. Calves grew strong. The kids visit every Sunday, help with chores, eat pie on the porch while the sun goes down, gold over land their great-grandfather cleared with his own hands. That's legacy. Not the house or the money or who signed what papers. It's in the dirt under your nails and the stories you tell while teaching a 7-year-old how to plant seeds. Church still feels different. Some folks won't meet my eye. Others shake my hand longer now, like they're apologizing without words. Pastor Jim's still there, still preaching truth even when it's uncomfortable. That counts for something. Spring wheat will be ready for harvest come July. Tommy's already planning to help. Says his boy wants to learn to drive the combine. Maggie's planting more flowers next weekend. Perennials, the kind that come back on their own. You can't unring a bell, but you can decide what tune you play after. I got my name back. Got my land. Got my kids and grandkids who know their grandfather didn't break when things got hard. That's worth more than 80 acres ever could be.